Hello, class. Welcome to Political Science 200, American National Government. Today we will be talking about whatever I choose to talk about.
No, it'll be economic policy again. We will be finishing up economic policy, and if we have time, hopefully, focusing a little bit on regulatory policy and some regulatory policy typologies. If we have time, but we'll see how much time we have. Okay, so, Natalie.
Yes.
In our last lecture, we discussed tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
And why might tariffs be used?
To balance buying stuff from your own nation versus globally.
Yeah, exactly, right? And another word for that is protectionism.
Protectionism.
Right? So you protect your domestic automobile industry or steel industry or aluminum industry, so that even though it may not be able to compete as efficiently as other countries in the free market, it can still survive and provide jobs for people in your country and that type of thing, right?
Yep.
So very good, very good. So one reason we do it is just to protect domestic industry and jobs and that type of thing. Another reason we do it sometimes is out of national security interests, right? Are you just in a better position as a country if you're able to meet all of your own food needs with your own production?
Yes, because when the apocalypse hits, we rely on no one.
That's right, actually. You want to have your own domestic food supply. So in the U.S., we grow tons of corn, we grow tons of wheat, tons of fruits and vegetables. We're fine. We'll be just fine. Yes, we trade with other countries, right? We eat bananas, mangoes, other things that are often grown in other countries.
From Honduras.
Yes. So my daughter just held up some bananas that were grown in Honduras. But the thing is, from a national security standpoint, we can live without bananas, quite frankly, as long as you have enough, grain, corn, dairy, meat, all those other things will be just fine. And the U.S. Produces a lot in terms of food. So, do we also have a good domestic steel industry?
I think so, don't
Yes. Do we have a good domestic automobile industry?
Yes.
Yes. Airline manufacturing industry?
Yep.
Yes. So, again, sometimes tariffs are used to protect certain industries, especially if they are tied in a broad way to national security or our just economic stability and overall well-being. Right?
Yep.
Any questions on that?
No.
Okay. This takes us to the World Trade Organization, sometimes called the WTO. This is an international organization derived from the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade that promotes free trade around the world. In theory,
Yes.
does free trade lead to the efficient allocation of resources?
Yes.
Yes. Yep. The problem is, again, markets don't always work as efficiently as we assume, right? So, again, if pesticides are used in one country to grow bananas, but they're not used in another, and that increases the yield in the country where they use a lot of pesticides, which country's banana industry is gonna thrive?
The pesticide-ridden one.
The pesticide-ridden one, exactly. And so, free trade in theory sounds like a great idea, but you got to make sure that in order to lead to the efficient allocation of resources, you got to make sure that all labor laws are being followed and all environmental laws are being followed, right? Again, we discuss the importance of externalities. I'll rephrase this. Do we, here in Alabama, grow very good peaches just down I-65 in Chilton County?
Yeah, they're yummy.
Chilton County peaches. They are divine, right? As far as I know, very similar production processes are used to grow them as in California in terms of water. As a matter of fact, they probably use they need less water because they get more naturally here, right? Pesticides, I assume they're about the same because they're in the same country. So, tell me how California peaches wind up at Walmart when they have to cross the whole country almost, and Chilton County peaches grow
down the road.
Just down the road.
They have more peaches.
Okay. Yeah, but I mean, they're still selling them right next to Chilton County peaches in our market. I guess what I'm saying is, how can they charge a similar price when the Chilton County peach should obviously have the
upper hand
efficiency advantage? Yeah, because it's grown closer.
Maybe in California, produce costs less to produce.
You're overcomplicating things.
Right.
All the pollution that is produced as that truck goes from here to California, or from California to Alabama, all the pollution that comes out of those truckers' smokestacks, tailpipes, whatever. Is that pollution worked into the price of those peaches from California?
Yeah. No.
No. Where it's not worked in, right? Are you fouling the air all the way from California to Alabama?
Yep.
Yes, you are. Will people get respiratory illnesses, sometimes lung cancer?
Yep. Even
from those? Yes. Are those costs worked into the price of a California peach? No. Right? And so that's one of the concerns with these free trade agreements, right? Is the backers of them really support the idea of free trade in general, but a lot of the time they will turn a blind eye to things like pollution, which is a classic negative externality. And if you really believe in the efficiency of markets, then the price of that pollution should be worked into the cost of whatever good or service is being provided. Make sense?
Yep. Okay,
so that's my beef with a lot of these, trade agreements. All right. Now let's turn to an excise tax. This is a consumer tax on a specific kind of merchandise, such as tobacco. An excise tax. Okay, do taxes on tobacco usually have high levels of public support?
Yes.
Yes. Why?
Because tobacco isn't good for you.
Yeah, number one, people are like, you don't need it to survive. It's not the same as food.
But then why don't we tax alcohol?
We do tax alcohol.
Never mind.
Yeah, we definitely tax alcohol. That's one of the things the Founding Fathers in the Federalist Papers held up as something that should be taxed, right? Because Is tobacco bad for your health?
Yes.
Yes. Can you live without it?
Yes.
Yes. Does less than 50% of the population smoke?
Yes.
Yes, very much so, right? So if you put it to a vote in a state, that say has the initiative process, right? Let's have a tax on cigarettes and we'll use it to provide health care for children.
Boom.
Is that almost always going to pass?
Yes.
Yes.
A+, appeal to the children.
Yes, right, exactly. And that's basically exactly what we have. And it's, one of the ways we fund certain things is by taxing things like tobacco. A specific product that you don't necessarily need in order to survive. And then the extra way to gain political support, tie it directly to something that has a lot of sentimental or emotional appeal. And what has more emotional appeal than healthcare coverage for children?
Nothing.
Almost nothing, exactly, right? So those taxes are almost always going to pass. Now, if you're a smoker, you probably think that's not the greatest, but the argument would be made, you don't need to survive, so if you don't want to pay the tax, what can you do?
Don't smoke.
Don't smoke. Quit. Exactly. You don't want to pay the tax, then quit. Okay, now let's talk about progressive taxes for a minute. And this is just a way of thinking about taxes, right? Theoretically, exactly. You never say, no, I've got to pay my progressive tax today. You never say that. But people do say, I've got to pay my federal income taxes. And federal income taxes are gathered in a progressive fashion. So, let me show you how this works. The data are a little old, from 2008, but it illustrates the point. Let's just look at the single. Nat, look at this and read this.
All right.
So, single, if you make between $0 to $8,025, how much will you pay on the money you earn in that bracket?
10%.
10%, exactly. Now, say you're really doing well and you make $32,550, right?
That's right, I do.
Okay. Now, when that happens, the first $8,025 are still only taxed at 10%, right? The next, roughly $24,000, that starts to get taxed at 15%.
How is that allowed?
Well,
I worked hard for my
quit complaining. Yeah. And so now say you make $32,551.
Yes.
How many dollars will be taxed at 25%?
30. Well, $1 of my dollars.
$1. If you make $32,551, $1 will be taxed at 25%. The money between $8,000 to $26,000 to $32,550 will still only be taxed at 15%, and the first roughly $8,000 will still only be taxed at 10%.
Aha.
Do you understand that?
Yes.
A lot of Americans have the mistaken understanding that if you make it into a higher bracket, all of your money gets taxed at that higher rate. That is not true.
That is false.
That is false. False, right? So, I think when you start talking money, a lot of Americans just tune out. Right? But if more Americans understood this, I think there would be more support for progressive taxes, particularly your federal income tax, right? Because you realize, it's only when you hit those higher brackets that you really start paying at really higher rates. And like I said, this was 2008, and it's gone back and forth. Like the highest bracket was like 39.6 or something like that. But historically, this is still really low. There was a time when the highest tax bracket was once you made over a certain amount, then you paid like 91% of your...
Dang!
Yeah, I know, but that was only once you made over like whatever it was, $2 million. I'm just drawing that number out of a hat. But you get the point.
Yeah.
Historically, this marginal tax rate in the 30s, the high 30s, whatever it is right now, it moves around. Historically, that's fairly low, right? So, just keep that in mind. Now, what do you think of the progressive income tax?
I think it's good.
Why is that?
Makes sense. Because, honestly, in my honest opinion, when you have that much money, how are you even going to spend it anymore?
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't make sense because there's so many people off worse than you, and you're like, oh, I need another pair of golden slippers.
Right.
It's like, what the heck, man?
Yeah.
You don't even need that.
Right. And so one of the arguments for the progressive tax is exactly what you said. In this type of situation, we should ask, what would a person do with the money if they were allowed to keep it instead of paying it in taxes, right? And the answer which you just gave is they would spend it on luxuries because all the necessities of life have already been met for them.
Yes, I have an example. Kim Kardashian has someone fly in to clean her floors.
Well, okay, see, there you go.
They're custom made.
Okay.
Just putting that out there.
Okay, well, there you go. Okay, whereas, Natalie,
Yes.
even go back to our lowest tax bracket here, $8,025, if that person were allowed to keep their money that they had to pay in taxes, what would they probably spend it on? Food and necessities of life. Food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, transportation, schooling, yeah, necessities, right? So anyway, that's one of the arguments for the progressive tax. Another argument for the progressive tax is you go where the money is, right? Does Congress have power to tax and spend for the general welfare?
Yes.
Yes. So one of the arguments for the progressive tax is the wealthy have a lot of money. You go where the money is, and so we're going to tax them at higher rates. And Congress has broad power to tax and spend for the general welfare. So we can tax the wealthy at very high rates and then provide nutrition programs for kids in school. Even though, does it say anywhere in the U.S. Constitution that the federal government is supposed to run nutrition programs for low-income children in schools? No, it doesn't. But does Congress have power to tax and spend for the general welfare? Yep. So does providing nutrition programs in in public schools, K through 12, does that help the general welfare?
Yes.
It does. It does. Just give the low-income kids some food so that they're able to concentrate and learn, right? Now, do you want the next argument on progressive income taxes?
Sure.
Of course you do, right? Our society has developed in such a way, right, that some people do very well.
Yep.
And some people don't do quite so well, right?
Yeah.
if our society developed in such a way that we were still largely agricultural,
Yes.
right? And you kind of earned your keep by the sweat of your brow.
Yep.
How much money do you think Bill Gates would be worth? What he is worth now or less?
Less.
Substantially less, right?
Yeah.
But do we have patent laws in place?
We do.
We do. Do we have an electricity infrastructure in place?
Yes.
Yes, we do. He's done very well in the computer industry. If our laws had been different, if technology had developed a different way, would he have nearly as much money?
No.
No, he would not. So one of the arguments for a progressive income tax is, to a certain extent, especially those with large amounts of wealth, you've benefited greatly due to how our society and our laws have developed. You didn't do that 100% on your own, and maybe you owe a little bit more back. This is where Obama kind of generated some controversy because he said, you know, that small business you started or whatever it is, you didn't do that on your own, right?
Ooh.
I know. And conservatives are like, what are you talking about? Are you denying the entrepreneurial spirit that defines America? You know, and he was like, no, I'm just acknowledging the fact that your workers need to get to work. And how do your workers get to work?
Public transportation.
Well, roads. Yeah, roads that were built at taxpayer expense a lot of the time, right? And we have an electricity infrastructure, right? You didn't build that on your own, right? And we have laws that protect private property. So anyway, the point he is making is, especially in a society as advanced as ours, you are very unlikely to be able to start a business and run it entirely on your own. What do you think of that argument?
It makes sense.
It does. It makes sense. Now, are you ready for my one progressive income tax joke? I don't tell many jokes.
Sure.
Hey, how many people have progressive income tax jokes? I read this years ago in U.S. News and World Report by one of the editors. I thought it was hilarious when he was talking about progressive income tax. But anyway, so there's this guy, you know, he multi-millionaire, tons of money, and this philanthropic organization finds out that he hasn't donated anything to charity, right? And so one of the guys from the philanthropic organizations comes up to this multimillionaire and says, hi, our records indicate that you haven't given to any philanthropic organizations in the last year. Would you consider donating to our charity? And the guy says, oh, your records show that, do they? All right. Well, do your records show that I have a father who's suffering from Alzheimer's and needs long-term care? And they said, no, our records didn't show anything about that. He said, I see. Do your records show anything about my brother that was in a foreign country conducting business, and he was basically taken hostage and wouldn't be released without a ransom? And the guy from the philanthropic organization said, sorry, our records miss that entirely. And the millionaire said, I see. Did your records indicate that I have a daughter whose husband left her with 5 kids to take care of and no visible means of support? They tell you about that? And the guy said, sorry, we missed that. And the millionaire said, okay, I see. Well, now I have a question for you. If I'm not helping any of them, what makes you think I'm going to help you?
Oh.
I love that joke. I think it's I think it's hilarious. And like I said, I read it years ago in U.S. News and World Report. And yeah, there you go. There's logic behind the progressive income tax. Okay, now let's talk a minute about regressive tax. Regressive taxes.
Okay.
And regressive taxes are taxes that take a higher percentage of the income of low-income people than of high-income people, right? Today's a day in class where I usually draw on the board a lot, but I'm not going to do it here. Just now, I need your active participation.
Okay.
Okay. If I'm very poor, and we're just using these numbers to keep the math simple. If I'm very poor, I make $10 a day. I go and I buy $10 worth of groceries. I know this is sad. And I pay $1 in taxes, right? Then, no, say I pay $9 in groceries and $1 in taxes.
Okay.
Okay? For a total of $10, then what percentage of my daily take-home pay does that represent?
10%.
10%. Very good. Now, say I make $100 a day.
Mm-hmm.
Doing pretty good. Doing better. I go buy the same groceries. I pay the same dollar in sales taxes. What percentage of my income does that represent?
1/100.
That's right, 1%. Exactly. So, are sales taxes regressive?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, they take a higher percentage of the income of low-income people than of high-income people. See, a lot of people say, oh, sales taxes are even. They're both paying $1, right? We're like, yeah, but as a percentage of what you're earning, that's a much higher percentage of the income of low-income people than of high-income people. Make sense?
Makes sense.
Okay, now, without complicating things too much, but just trying to be honest, is a lottery regressive?
Ooh.
Who tends to play the lottery?
Richer people. No, poor people.
Poor people, yeah. So, as we as a society debate different ways of generating revenue, right?
Yeah.
Taxes, tariffs, excise taxes, income taxes, sales taxes, property taxes, right? One of the things that you should consider is, do they tend to be progressive or regressive, right? And one of the concerns with a lottery is it tends to be regressive because usually lower income people pay the lottery.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Makes sense.
Okay, so now let's return to our cigarettes example. In general, are cigarette taxes progressive or regressive?
Regressive.
Regressive. Lower income people tend to smoke more than higher income people right now.
They smoke
Yeah.
cigar. I'm kidding.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's also something to keep tucked in the back of your mind. When debating how to generate revenue, right?
Yep.
I guess I'll tell my next joke. I usually don't tell this one, but since it's, I don't know what day of the quarantine I'll tell this joke. I've heard the lottery described as a tax on those who don't know how to do math.
Jeez.
Yeah, funny. Because your odds of winning are slim to none, but people still play it. All right, now let's shift gears now and talk about the deficit. The deficit is the difference between the revenues raised annually from sources of income other than borrowing and the expenditures of government, including paying the interest on past borrowing. So in other words, the deficit is the difference between how much the government's bringing in and how much they're spending, right? And so just to show you how this works, again, have some data here. They're a little old, but they illustrate the point. In the early 90s, we were running $1 billion deficits. Do you see there? Like 90, a little over 200 billion. 91, about 250 billion. 92, inching up on 300 billion. See that?
Yeah. Okay.
So that's each year you're going in the hole that much.
Oy.
Yeah. So the deficit is how much you're going in the hole each year. The debt is how much you're in the hole after all those years of deficit spending. Yeah. A lot of Americans do not distinguish between the two. A lot of Americans do not know the difference between the two, right? So the national debt is the total amount of money the federal government has borrowed to finance deficit spending over the years. And you and I looked it up just the other day.
Yes.
About what is the national debt at now?
I believe it was at either 22 trillion or 24 trillion.
24 trillion. About 24 trillion. Right? And these stimulus packages were helping, that are designed to help get the economy going and help people out.
Yeah.
Just throw another couple trillion on there. Yeah, I know. And so it's getting really bad. Okay, so now...
Why did we even get those? We can only go to online stores right now.
Yeah, I know.
They gave them to us too early.
Yeah,
the money's
I know.
gonna be gone. It's all going to Amazon.
Anyway, let's return to this. So, here it is. So, how is the economy doing in the early to mid 90s?
It was doing okay.
It was doing okay, right? How was it doing in the late 90s?
It was fantastic.
It was booming, right?
We're in the green
We're
section.
in the green. Yeah,
That's
so
amazing.
well, it is. You see, usually we're in the red, and now currently we're, like our deficits are like in the trillions.
Yeah. It's bad.
But yeah, so the thing was, the 2000 election, right? Look, we're running a surplus, a pretty good surplus.
Yeah.
And both in 2000 it was Al Gore versus George W. Bush.
Yeah.
Right? And they were both saying, well, we're bringing in more than we're spending. What should we do? What do you suppose Al Gore said?
I don't know what Al Gore said, but maybe he said work on, I don't know.
Well, he said a couple things. One is we know that Social Security is going to need to be funded properly soon here. So put in lockbox. Also, you can pay down all these previous years of deficit spending. Those don't just go away. Yeah, and also you're paying interest on all that money, right? And so that's something that a lot of people forget is they'll say, oh, well, so what? We have, 24 trillion in debt. But the thing is, that's financed through borrowing money. And so the question then becomes, who's buying the money. You know what I mean? Who's loaning the federal government this money?
Where do we get this from?
Yeah, it's T-bills and treasury bonds, basically. And so the thing is, if it's Americans buying them, then it's no big deal. Because what's better than a debt that you owe to yourself, right?
Yeah.
The concern is when a lot of our deficit is foreign owned.
Oh.
Yeah.
So we could become like the United States of China.
Well, see, that's the concern, is if a lot of it becomes foreign owned, you don't control your own destiny, right? So our interest rates at historic lows right now.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, they are, right? And so financing our national debt isn't the end of the world right now because interest rates are so low. But say that people stop buying T-bills or T-bonds, right? Or like the Chinese decide we're not going to buy them anymore, right?
Uh-oh.
Yeah. And then if you have no buyers for your treasury bills, then what's going to happen to the interest rates on T-bills?
They're going to go down. Up.
Up. Why?
Because the ones that have been bought, they need to...
Okay, look, say I buy a $100 T-bill.
What even is a T-bill?
Treasury bill, that's government debt.
Okay.
You're buying a T-bill, right? So say you're buying one for a 12 month.
All right.
Right? And it's $100 and it pays 1% interest.
Okay.
Then at the end of the 1 year, how much do you get back?
12 plus.
Huh?
Nothing, I don't know.
$100 and it pays 1% interest.
I said $12. At the end of 12 months.
A year.
Oh.
We'll try this again. $101. Okay? Right?
Yeah.
So that's the way things go when interest rates are low. But say the government offers that and no one will buy for 1%. So I don't want to give you my money for a whole year and then get $101 back.
Yeah, I want my money.
I want my money. And so if no one's buying, then what's going to happen to interest rates?
They go up.
They go up, right? And so say it's 10% for a year.
Yeah.
Then if I buy a $100 T-bill, then how much do I get back after a year?
$110.
$110.
Ka-ching.
Ka-ching, right? And it just costs the government 10 times as much to finance its debt.
Uh-oh.
Well, exactly, as when interest rates were low. You get it?
Yep.
So, again, just to bring these numbers home to you and everybody in my class, we're $24 trillion in debt. When interest rates are low, is that the end of the world?
No.
No. If interest rates increase rapidly, does that become a big problem very quickly?
Yes.
Yes.
And we're going to have to deal with it because all you guys are dying soon.
No, I'm not dying soon. I'm hanging around a long time. I plan on living to 100.
All right.
Okay, so next, let's talk about the next thing. And I am just keeping the math easy on this. Let's talk about the GDP to debt ratio, right? Mm-hmm. So GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. It's the total output of all the economic activity of the nation, including goods and services, right? So if Ford produces a $15,000 car, sells a $15,000 car, how much has the GDP just gone up by?
$15,000.
$15,000. There you go. It's the value of all the goods and services, right? Okay. So, how big is the U.S. economy?
Big.
Big.
Huge.
Right? Huge. Right? So, depending on whether you want to think of it as the GDP to debt ratio or debt to GDP ratio, whatever, I like thinking of it as the GDP to debt ratio. Right? So, say our GDP is $24 trillion.
Yeah.
And our debt is $24 trillion.
Hey, we're breaking even.
Well, not necessarily breaking even. One way of looking at it is our debt relative to the size of our economy is not that bad.
Yeah.
Right? Now, contrast that with Greece.
Oh, aren't they in some...
Well, yeah, see, they were in a lot of trouble. And so, and I'm just to keep the math simple. Simple.
Okay.
Put Greece up here. U.S. down here. Say Greece is $2 trillion in debt. Oh, that's nothing.
Yeah.
But their GDP is $1 trillion a year. Who's actually in the better situation?
The U.S. of A.
The U.S. of A, exactly, right? And so that's why when some of these countries are going under and no one wants to buy any of their government issued bonds or anything, you don't want to buy their debt, basically.
No, I don't.
No, people say, well, what's the big deal? Their debt's nothing compared to the U.S. Well, yeah, but who has the world's largest economy?
We do?
Yes.
Oh, I thought China did.
I know, common mistake. I ask my class that all the time. Hopefully, class, you got that right. Who has the world's largest economy? We do.
Wow!
Who has the world's largest military? We do.
That we know of.
Yeah, that by far, right? Okay, so there we go. Make sense?
Yes.
Do you feel like you understand economic policy a little better now?
A little better.
Okay, now, a couple things. I could bore you with more charts showing you exactly where the money goes, right? But let me just break it down as simply as I can for you. Programs for old people, programs for poor people, and the military. At the end of the day, that's programs for poor people, programs for old people, and the military. That's where the vast majority of our money goes. And we have to pay money on borrowing money to finance our national debt.
Yeah.
And the thing that really stings about that is if we weren't spending that money to pay interest on loans, then that money would be available for other things. Like all the worthwhile things that government can do when it's properly funded. Okay, now a couple things I want to discuss. One, and these are kind of think outside the box things. We don't talk about them a lot in the U.S., but they exist in other countries. Some people have called for a national sales tax, right?
Yep.
Because right now, really, what's the main way the federal government gets its money right now?
I don't know.
Oh, and that's because you're not going to the... Well, anyway, it's through federal income taxes.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yep, I don't qualify for those.
Yeah.
Ah, sucker!
That's right, yeah. It's through federal income taxes. Some people said maybe we need a national sales tax. as well.
Ah.
Yeah. Now here's the thing. Are sales taxes generally considered progressive or regressive?
Progressive. Regressive.
Regressive. Sales taxes are generally considered regressive.
Okay.
So one of the concerns with the national sales tax is sales taxes are generally considered regressive. And so the argument is made, well, if you file a valid tax return, then maybe you should get a tax credit that would allow you to cover the sales tax on most purchases. But a national sales tax would still, of course, have to be paid by any visitors to the U.S., and they wouldn't get a tax credit in their... Yeah, and they wouldn't get a tax credit each year. It also gives people an incentive to come to the country legally. Then file a valid tax return. So those arguments are made for national sales tax. I'll end... Well, I'm not end. One more thing to say on this. But I actually lived in Canada when they implemented a national sales tax, right?
Oh, yeah, you did.
Yeah, I was there for 2 years. Essential services, like food,
Yeah.
they were not taxed.
Ah.
Right, and that's one of the ways to make sales taxes less regressive is you exempt food, shelter,
Yeah.
hospital visits, medicine. You exempt those things. But otherwise, you tax other stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, this guy owned a dry cleaning shop, and dry cleaning was deemed non-essential, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so he tried to beat the system for a little while, and customers would come in to pick up their dry cleaning, and they'd pay for it, and he'd say, the dry cleaning's free,
Yeah.
but you have to buy this potato. And he had all these potatoes, because potatoes were considered essential services, and it cost...
Weirdo.
Yeah, and it cost $12, which was the same as your dry cleaning, but there's no taxes on it. This made the papers when I was in Canada. I thought it was kind of funny, and the government shut that down pretty fast. And like, they gotta pay on the dry cleaning. Yeah, this potato. I thought that was hilarious.
What if someone said they just don't want the potato?
Yeah, then you're out of luck, I guess.
Come
I
in
want to
the
pay on my taxes on my dry clean. Anyway, next thing Bernie Sanders, I think, has contributed to the debate is, what do we tax? And
Yeah.
I think a real argument can be made that a tax on stock transactions might be worth looking at.
Yeah, all the rich people have stock.
Right. And see, so the average person doesn't buy and sell stock regularly. Who buys and sells stock?
The fancy.
Yeah, the wealthy. So it'd be a tax on the wealthy.
Yeah, who pay people to buy and do their stock.
Yeah, actually they do. They pay brokers a lot of time. But one of the advantages would be, depending on how much money you have, one of the advantages would be it'd be a tax on the wealthy. The other advantage would be it would encourage people to hang on to their stocks longer, and so you don't engage in speculative trading as much, so that they're more investments rather than gambles.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think about a tax on stock transactions?
I think it makes a lot of sense.
I actually think it makes a lot of sense, too. I think it's good. All right. Well, class, We've covered economic policy. Hope you guys are having a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.